I've been writing about Twin Peaks almost since the original show came on. I originally worked with Craig Miller on a magazine called Wrapped in Plastic, which we did for 13 years. And we interviewed so many people from the original show. Took a little break. I didn't think there was going to be any more Twin Peaks. It came back. All of a sudden, found myself writing again for the Blue Rose magazine. And then, of course, having seen the new Twin Peaks, I processed that for many, many years. And over those years, I wrote my new book, which is called Ominous Whoosh, A Wandering Mind Returns to Twin Peaks. In that book, I try to kind of unwrap a little bit of what's happening, I think, in that show and explain a few ideas about what I think might help resolve some of the curiosities in the show. Audience was in my mind when I was writing the book, for sure. I was thinking about two audiences. Clearly, the audience that was a fan of Twin Peaks: The Return, who wanted those deep dives, who wanted to get some insight into some of the workings of the show. I also was very aware that there were a group of fans who weren't totally thrilled with the new show, or it dissatisfied them in some way. I wanted to try to reach them and say, here's some ways of looking at it that might make it feel better, or there are some approaches that might help explain some of why you didn't like it, and show why I still think it's worthwhile to explore, and how it still fits in with the old Twin Peaks. I hope I reach a couple of those people. They were definitely in my mind while I was writing.
We live inside a dream.
There's a couple of puzzles or questions that linger over the work. Perhaps the most important one is Cooper's face that appears in part 17. Cooper's face appears over the action. It's superimposed over the action in part 17. It speaks, and the face says, "We live inside a dream." None of the characters that we're watching in the show are aware of that face. That face exists somewhere between the characters in the story and the audience who's watching. That is important. We can't ignore that. We cannot dismiss that. Any attempt to examine Twin Peaks: The Return has to keep that in mind. In fact, really has to keep that in mind from the beginning of your thinking of it. When you're watching part 1, you have to be thinking of that aspect of the story that happens in part 17. I felt like Lynch was signaling to us that was critically important, that Cooper's speaking to the audience.
We live inside a dream.
What does it mean? I examined a lot of that, and Lynch has used that term before when he was introducing Inland Empire, when he was taking it on tour around the country in 2005. He apparently, when he would stand up in front of the audience, he would say the Hindu phrase, "We are like the dreamer who dreams and lives inside the dream." And of course, the phrase also appeared in Fire Walk with Me when Philip Jeffries appears and says, "We live inside a dream."
We live inside a dream.
What does it mean? And so I tried to really find out what the Hindu interpretation of that phrase means. And Lynch is an advocate, or I should say a follower of Hindu philosophy. And so what is the Hindu meaning? What are they trying to convey? And from what I've read, it's the idea that we all see the world a unique way. We all see it specific to ourselves. When they say we're dreaming, it's that we're perceiving the world. The world isn't exactly as it is, but we see it a certain way. It's not you went to sleep, you closed your eyes, and you had a fantasy in your mind overnight like we all do. We have dreams. That's not what that phrase, I think, and I think that Hindu scholars would agree, that's not what that phrase means. We are like the dreamer who dreams and lives inside the dream. It's that we all see a world that's unique to ourselves. That, to me, was sort of the crucial piece. And if Cooper's face is appearing and no character is seeing it, but we're seeing it, the implication, I think, is that he's telling us, I see the story a certain way. I'm conveying to you a story through my eyes, through my mind. And so that's what I latched onto and explored and tried to back up with some research into Hindu philosophy and much of what Lynch has said over the years. Lynch has in multiple interviews talked about The world is as you are is a quote that Lynch will use frequently. And the meaning behind the world is as you are is that you see the world a unique way. Each of us sees it a unique way. And I think that the clever thing maybe that Lynch is trying to do in The Return is to say the story we're watching it as if we are Cooper, as if we are inhabiting his mind. That's the foundation of my book, is an attempt to step through the 18 hours, look at the character of Dale Cooper who's trapped in the Red Room. Parts of him have emerged into the real world. And to try to say, we live inside a dream means we're seeing the world as Cooper would see it. I do in the book have The Return divided into 3 acts. Act 1 is part 1 through 8. Act 2 is part 9 through 15. And then Act 3 is 16, 17, and 18. That pattern, that structure became evident to me as I was writing about it. I saw, essentially at the end of part 8, we have sort of a big end of act event. We have the flashback, the atomic explosion. We had a lot of stuff happen in part 7 that sort of raises the stakes on everything. Part 9 and part 10 and part 11, there's a plateauing that happens. Not a lot. The characters get locked in place for the most part. I think the FBI Blue Rose Task Force are kind of stuck in Buckhorn, and they don't really move. They just stay there in part 9 through 15. The Roadhouse booth conversations, which are these curious, disconnected scenes, they only happen between part 9 and 15. And in fact, part 15 ends with one of them, which is Ruby screaming. In some ways, it adds to my theory is that is frustrating for you. Well, that's what Cooper's experiencing. Cooper is frustrated. And I say that explicitly. By part 16, he can't take it anymore. and that's the audience, too, to some extent. The opening scene for Audrey, where she's talking to Charlie, is like 12 minutes long, and nothing really happens. And I remember watching it with other fans. I watched that part with a group of people for the first time, and they were quite upset at not knowing what happened. And I would argue that is exactly what Lynch wants you to feel, because that's how Audrey feels. And I would argue that if you're frustrated in that Act 2, that's how Cooper feels. Cooper is not happy, and things aren't going the way he wants. He wants something to start to happen. And I would argue that he imposes himself on the story at that point, because the frustration gets so big that he kind of manifests within the story as sort of a Philip Jeffries-like phantom who's not really there. And I won't go into all of it, but I do go into it in the book. And as I say, part 15, there's sort of a crescendo of emotion that happens in part 15, and Ruby screams at the end. And much of the story we've been following ends in part 15. I mean, it's a fact. It's just a fact. It's not a theory. It's just so many of the characters are done in 15. We won't see them again. And so that seems to be a stopping point. And then we have, which is typical for a third act, it's shorter. We have really the Dale Cooper and Laura Palmer story kind of coming to a big climax as we go through 16, 17, and 18. And it just made sense to me. And I think when Frost and Lynch were probably laying it out, Frost particularly is a writer of great skill, and he knows how to break things down and act structures and how they work. He was probably plotting out the story. It may not have been supposed to be 8, 9, and 3, as a breaking, but the action and activity in those acts, I think he probably outlined it would happen that way. And so, yes, I do in the book have Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3 divided out with separate pages and a quote that I think is appropriate for each one that matches what is going to happen in that act.
What will be in the darkness that remains?
I had read Martha Nachemson, who's written a lot about Lynch's interest in Hindu Vedic texts. These are the texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. In Catching the Big Fish, which Lynch wrote, he quotes liberally from those different texts. They open various chapters in the book. In interviews, he talks about it, not just with Nachemson, but with other interviews. The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, whom he follows. So that's informing his worldview. Then, quite by accident, I was looking at some of the dialogue of the Log Lady in part 10, where she's talking to Hawk and she says,
that which is and is not.
and I happened to just type that into Google and was searching, and I found that her dialogue matched almost exactly some of this Hindu philosophy I found. And if you look closely then at what the Log Lady is saying in that scene, you see a lot of Hindu thinking there. So I schooled myself a little bit on Hindu philosophy. I bought a book, Hinduism for Dummies, because I certainly was a dummy about that, and read it and found fascinating things in there, which I'm really glad I looked at, because it helped me really see what might be happening with Laura, particularly as we see her depicted in part 8, when she is apparently created by the firemen and sent to Earth. Hindu philosophy believes that Vishnu, which is sort of the almighty overseer of the universe, and I apologize for some of the crude terminology I'm using, but it's my way of translating it. And over the ages of time, there is a cycle of ages, 4 distinct cycles: the gold, the silver, the bronze, and the iron, which is a cycle that happens and repeats itself. And during those ages, Vishnu sends various avatars down to Earth, to humanity, to aid them during crises. The last avatar, who happens to be the 10th avatar, is called Kalki, and Kalki comes down to end the Dark Age and restart the cycle of ages. The Dark Age is a time of evil, is a time of ascendant evil and gloom and doom. And then when Kalki ends that age, starts a golden age again, and the cycle begins again.
But in these days, the glow is dying.
As I explored that and found some fascinating things about Kalki, Kalki's the 10th avatar, the last avatar. And we find out throughout the return that 10 is the number of completion. And 10 occurs time and time again. So, well, there's the cycle and there's the last avatar. Kalki, the avatar that comes down, is associated with a white horse. A white horse is a critical component of Kalki. The white horse appears, and in the return, exclusively connected to Laura Palmer. I know the White Horse has a history in the Twin Peaks narrative, and it's connected to Sarah Palmer, but I believe that Lynch repurposed it in the return, connected it to Laura.
Now the circle is almost complete.
On top of that, we have, of course, the Log Lady say, Laura is the one. And we can't ignore that. Laura is the one. The one what? I mean, she's crucial somehow. She's crucial. And in that dialogue the Log Lady is talking about Laura, she said, what will be in the darkness that remains? The circle is almost complete. Laura is the one. I mean, it became very obvious to me, and maybe I'm just, because I like the theory, I can't see it any other way. It's like, oh, the circle's completing. Laura's the one to end the circle. She'll be in the darkness that remains. And then, of course, I found interviews from Lynch where he talks about the cycle of ages, the 4 ages, and the fact that we are currently living in the Dark Age and that there will be a Golden Age. It's just all of it sort of came together, and I wrote this sort of core middle chapter where I try to explain what Laura's new, redefined role is in Twin Peaks, that she is been created by the firemen, sent to Earth, not to combat Bob, but to be the one who will scream in the night and bring the Dark Age to a close. That is the other core thesis of the book.
Laura is the one.
Cooper's role is to deliver her to that place, that time and place, that he is to find Laura. The fireman sets him on a mission, as does Leland, in the very first episode. Cooper's trapped. He's got to rehabilitate himself. He's got to get out. And then he's got this mission to get Laura, he doesn't even know why, to this one particular time and place so she can fulfill her destiny. Implicit in the return is this idea that things change. It's connected to the original series, but it has evolved beyond. It's not trying to explain things that happened. It's saying, well, this many years later now, here's sort of a different view of it. There are characters in The Return who are stuck in the past. Many characters have not been able to move forward. Norma is kind of stuck in the same place. Ben Horne is stuck. James is certainly stuck. He can't help but sing that song over and over again to these sort of avatars of Maddie and Donna. I think implicit is this idea that if we're stuck in the Twin Peaks of 1990, 1992 era, then we can't see the change that's happened to us, the change that's happened in the world. And it's not until you sort of can accept that things change, things are different, that you can move forward. Nadine accepts that things have changed and she moves forward. Ed and Norma do finally accept maybe things are different and they are able to move forward. So I think that there's sort of this idea in The Return that, yeah, it's Twin Peaks. It's just like the old show, except don't think of the old show. And I don't think that's a problem, but I do think that really, really pushed some fans away. I think they wanted the old show, they wanted a continuation and they wanted things to be tied up. And I completely understand that. And I don't criticize that, but I think The Return was almost saying to us sort of subtextually, don't hang on to that view of it. Just let it be part of you. And then here's Twin Peaks again. Thank you very much for having me. I mean, I love to talk about Twin Peaks and I really enjoyed the conversation. And, anyone out there who wants to contact me through Twitter and talk about Twin Peaks, I'm open to debating it and discussing it and defending some of my ideas. I enjoy doing that. So hopefully talk again.